privilege. This is now a Melbourne institution, so I'm really honoured to be here tonight. I'm going to try to keep my talk short so that there's questions and answers afterwards, and I hope we have an engaging conversation at the end of all of this. Having said that, there's a lot of imagery to show tonight, so I thought I'd start with some influences, not all of them, just a few, just as a sort of a cross-section of what I've looked at over the course of my career. So in 1966, I made that important declaration at the age of 5 that I want to be an architect and draw all kinds of chins of horses or hoses, which my prep teacher, Miss Sheedy, kindly corrected. The interesting thing about that is that I already knew how to spell the word architect, but I also fitted the whole sentence on the page, so I was exhibiting a little bit of good graphic judgment even at the age of 5. 1966 was also a really important year because, of course, it was when decimal currency came in, but more importantly still, it's when St Kilda won the premiership. And that's one of my dad's drawings. So he was an architect he was a Frank Lloyd Wright acolyte. His archive is now in the Design Hub, which is a building that I designed. And so if you want to see these drawings in the flesh, you can go there and they'll show them to you. That's a drawing done with what was known as a ruling pen. A ruling pen was like tweezers that you dipped into ink. So it was pre the technical pen, rote rings as we used to call them, on tracing paper. And if you look at the original of that drawing and find the scratch marks where the errors were made, there's a couple. It's quite an exquisite piece of draftsmanship done in 1964, as you can see down the bottom there. And that house is still there and the original clients still have it. Fred Williams is one of our great artists, and his landscapes, particularly his etchings, are very inspiring to me. I love the sense of the scratched landscape in that etching, the sense that we're in a dry continent, the driest on the planet, and the power of the horizon in Australia. We're a flat country. And this hillside in Listerfield etching is brilliant because he simply takes the horizon line and tilts it to make a hill. And those powerful scribbles, those simple marks on etchings like this with Williams, makes him one of the great master draftsmen in this country. And have I got that right? So little pieces like that. Where am I? A line, a tree, a suggestion of something. The trees on the side of the hill growing that way. All of that combined is so evocative of our country, which I think is wonderful. And similarly, in a different way, Brett Whiteley is also an artist that I love. His draftsmanship is exquisite. His ability to control a line, to go from thin to fat to thin, is remarkable. And in a drawing like that one, quite consummate. It's quite an extraordinary drawing. If you look closely at that drawing, you see the person taking the dogs for a walk in perspective, disappearing up there. That's what's known as talent. And you know, with talent, you can't make it, you can't break it. You either got it or you don't. And Brett Whiteley certainly had it. And more recently, I've been really interested in Anthony Gormley's work. And his drawings are quite beautiful. And the figure is really important for architects to understand because figures occupy space. So architects learn about proportion by learning about the figure in space. And Gormley's sketches are exquisite, I think, and evocative. And I was really lucky. I got to meet him once when he was out here at Anna Schwartz's, and he autographed a book of mine, which I've still got. Not of me, of him. As a student at Melbourne University in the 1980s, a friend and I insisted that the university reintroduce life drawing as a subject for architects. And they did, and for 2 years we did life drawing classes, and as a final year research subject we were allowed to do a thesis, and I studied Michelangelo's cartoons. And our teacher, Colin Munro, was a design studio leader. He was also a raw studio painter. He'd been trained by Henry Moore. And the very first life drawing class that we had, Colin brought in a skeleton, supported vertically, and taught us about human anatomy and how to depict it. The other thing that was going on there, and this is the only drawing that I have that's mine of that era of life drawings. I think I probably threw the rest out. But what we were learning then was to train our eye to see proportion and understand how humans occupy space, as well as refining our drawing techniques. And that group of images that I've just shown is an overview of how I see drawing and how I like certain things about drawing. The life drawing classes were incredibly valuable and very informative. And I say to young architects today when I talk to them, whatever you do, do life drawing, because you're training your eye. You're learning about proportion. Back in those days, pre the internet, you graduated and then went on a grand tour. That was the de rigueur. So I ended up spending a lot of time in Japan and then in Europe on my grand tour. And this is pre the days of the smartphone. So you took photographs with film in a camera, usually slide film, and you drew the buildings. So the object of the exercise was to go and see the buildings that one had studied as a student and draw them and spend time with them. And the difference now that I can see with young architects is that they pull their phone out, they take the snap, they Instagram it and they move on. Whereas me spending nearly a week at La Tourette, Le Corbusier's convent in France, meant that I got to meet young architects from other countries. I spent time there, I slept in the bedrooms there, and I got to draw the building. And drawing the building in proportion and accurately, so there are 18 openings in that brise-soleil in each row. To draw accurately is another skill that can only come with the pencil or the pen. It can't come with the computer. Ronchamp, these are out of my grand tour sketchbooks from, I don't know, 40 years ago. Another Villa Savoy. Some interiors of La Tourette. Brunelleschi's Duomo in Florence with some notes about sculpture and Michelangelo and Mario Botta and others. The Foundling Hospital by Brunelleschi, also in Florence. Anne-Marie and I were taken on a tour of that building when we were last in Florence. It's been beautifully converted into a museum now. Villa Rotunda in Vicenza, Andrea Palladio's masterwork, closed that day, obviously. Il Redentore in Venice. So I've been very lucky to have twice been a visiting professor at the School of Architecture in Venice. And each year I had to drag students away from their computer screen, walk down the waterfront about a kilometre, maybe less, and sit them opposite that building on Giudecco and make them draw it like I drew it. And also analyse it, because those of you who know Palladio know his shtick was to lay a facade over facade over facade and understand it in terms of the use of right angle proportion, which was prevalent at the time. That would have been in 1985 with that little planned sketch. I need my glasses. I was introducing someone who's giving a talk the other day in Geelong, and I couldn't find my glasses when I got on stage. It was really tricky. I said about this building at the time, positive and positive dynamism, third quarter round pilasters bulge into space to balance recessed walls. The result is dynamic horizontal flow of elements through the altar stroke focal point in brackets, which in my opinion should be curved. How precocious. I was 24. And vertical movement, column, to cornice, which reinforces plan shape and enhances movement, to arch and squinch. You can ask me what a squinch is later. To cornice of dome, to lantern, heaven in brackets. Enter, coffering in the dome emphasises height, and my conclusion was it was an arrogant use of elements to carve space. Plastic. Sketching in that regard is a form of self-education. So it's me analysing a building, having studied the building. People who know that building know that down the road is Bernini's San Andrea. The Bernini-Borromini thing was a big thing. Bernini had the favour of the Pope, Borromini was unfavoured. It's a bit like me and John Wardle. Now, sketchbooks. So I have a lot of sketchbooks. I don't know, I've lost count of how many books I've got. Occasionally in my sketchbooks I do drawings like that, which is to remind me of what I've done and where I'm going with my work. So that's a series of buildings that I've done in different building types. So at the top there is Future Shack, the park bench house, the bus shelter house, the dignified rubbish bin. Here are houses from Faraday Street all the way through to whenever this drawing was done, to whatever house that is. Unbuilt work. The Woodley School Science Faculty Building, RMIT Design Hub and others and so on. So that's me just reminding myself of to stay focused and to understand what I did and where I'm going. But the sketchbooks become records of thinking and means of resolving problems and solving problems. And these are a random selection. I don't know, I roughly know when they're taken from. For example, on that drawing, you can see a sketch of the little box that we added to our house at Q in the upper left-hand side. You'll always see calculations and numbers and notes in those sketchbooks. And I think there's 30 or 40 volumes of them now. There's multiple projects on that page. There's, right at the very top, the bridge that we did over the Maroondah Highway in Lilydale. Another bridge that we were looking at doing over Footscray Station. Some facade studies, some interior sketches of a building, another bridge sketch down the bottom, and right in the middle, that square sketch is the RMIT Design Hub, and that sketch ended up on the cover of Architecture Australia for the gold medal issue. There's also, people say my work's rigorous. Well, there's an eaves gutter being figured out, probably with the TV on in the background, over and over and over and over and over and over, for an inconsequential addition to a fibro cement shack in Balnarring. But the importance there is that finally the right gutter got built, and that's the rigour. That's the not accepting until it's the right solution. And there you see in that column of plans numbered 1 to 8, plans for the design hub. It's a 60 by 18 metre footprint. What building model will support this type, I asked myself. And at the bottom I said, number 1 is the only one. Number 2 is a good diagram, but can't provide flexibility for services and requires something, circulation, blah, blah, blah. And then in amongst all of that, there's a little bubble diagram they're known as. Here, working out the relationship between a cafe, an exhibition space, an entry and so on. So those sketchbooks are important. That's sketches of the Centre for Contemporary Photography in Fitzroy. There are some interior sketches of the design hub on that sheet, plus an idea for a vaulted building which ended up being built, this one down here, in the Grampians as a hiking shelter, and so on and so on. There you see, obviously, this was a long time ago, up in the top left-hand corner. There was the MasterCard debt, the Australian Tax Office problem, the overdraft, and so on. And then in the middle, you can see another one of those lines of projects probably to encourage me to keep going in that instance. There, and I'm mindful that Anne-Marie's here tonight, there's a long list of stuff to do in the house at home, in amongst some other sketches. And so, and Charles touched on it before, why do architects draw? Well, we draw to make sure that we can build. So our drawings typically are a means to an end, not an end in themselves. So working drawings are the drawings that architects produce when we're at that point where the design has been resolved and we're moving on to the builder and the building site. And in the days when I had hair, I used to spend time setting buildings out. And that's a really nice picture of an architect's drawing, and that's really what the drawings are like. They're on the muddy ground, being discussed with the client, some of her friends, and photographed by the other half of the client. And the discussion that day, that was in 1999, was where do we start the set out of the building that became this building? And so those drawings are everything for architects. And I'm going to show you a few projects quickly and some of the documentation that went with them. Sometimes there's a lot of drawings required to make a building. They're the tender drawings for the design hub, and that's a building. But the genesis of that building is in drawings like this one, which is still one of my favourite drawings. It's a believable representation of a component of a facade. It's dimensioned, it's to scale, it explains an intention quite clearly, and to go from that to that is simply a matter of then process and engineering and so on. There are 16,500 of those in that building. And that obviously, then that drawing became the basis of briefing facade engineers and so on and so on. Without that drawing, you can't get to that because it has to start somewhere. And so those suggestive, almost diagrammatic details, I personally love doing and still do them a lot. At the same time that building was being done, we did this tiny 70 square metre house alteration in Carlton. And at that time, I'd spent a day in Sydney with Glenn Murcutt interviewing him for the El Crocus monograph that was being produced on him. And so we spent a few hours in his drawing office, which is in the basement of his house. And I came back to the office and I said to Hales, we are not working hard enough. Glenn is working harder than us, and he's 25 years older than me, because he had multiple drawing boards going with working drawings pumping on each of the boards, sitting there working away. Anyway, that building, that tiny little building, was documented in pencil on tracing paper, but everything's detailed, and the details are wrought, so it's documented like you could build it tomorrow. That's the idea. Everything's shown, everything that's essential is detailed. There you see the bathroom floor with a hatch that flips up to reveal a sunken bath, so the shower platform, and then all of the details of how that is made. And similarly with an off-the-shelf material building like this one, built from stuff that you can buy at Bunnings, basically. And obviously in the Yuyangs, it's just a weekend shack. It's also documented to a high level of detail so that you can walk the knife edge of using off-the-shelf stuff to make architecture. You can't just snap your fingers and do that. You actually have to consider the detail, contemplate every possible connection in the building, and then proceed to draw it. And similarly with the M Pavilion. That's a drawing. So to get a facade to do that's reasonably complex. even in a small scale building like that one. And so we prototyped, that's one of our prototype drawings, and then detailed. And if you look closely, those of you who are architects in the room, who can understand the complexity of something like that, and also dare I say, the elegance of a bracket like that, can only be expressed, I think, in a drawing like that. The dilemma then is, how do you become relevant in the age of the computer, and how do we make presentation drawings that aren't pencil, because the expectation in the market is not for that anymore, and architects like me still have to survive. So the problem of a project like that one, which is our little chapel on the island of St George Maggiore in Venice, is how do we represent it beautifully and artistically, but using the computer to do so. And what we've learnt in the office is that using a really rudimentary combination of programs can provide drawings that are still elegant and considered, but also computer generated. And they're not generated from thin air, they're generated on the back of the pencil drawings that I've shown. And recently we've learned how to represent buildings in terms of computer graphics without making them look like real estate agents' drawings, and to try to make them feel artistic still, even though that's a machine. So introducing, well, the reason that's shown at the Opera House and in the Outback is because we were promoting the idea in that building that it was a mobile chapel. So it was a discussion about the missionary zeal of Catholicism. But so those drawings start to become a reasonable reflection on the nature of the hand-drawn in the office. I wanted to conclude by just showing you how we might handle that dilemma of presentation in a project that we were finalists in, which was the Art Gallery of New South Wales Sydney Modern project, which has recently been completed. So Sejima and Nishizawa won the competition. We were in the final 5. And we had the dilemma of reconciling the need for computer with the desire for the hand-wrought. And the message that I wanted to give the jury was that if we were selected, our building would be crafted and made as a bespoke building. So homogeneity is a problem in architecture now. Homogeneity causes things to all be the same across the globe. And typically the artistic expression for an architect ends on the building site but begins with the drawing and how they used to draw. So people had their own style. They had their own type of lettering, for example, and that became the beginnings of an expression that might result in a particular way of detailing a window or a door and so on. That's largely disappeared from the lexicon in architecture. So what I was trying to do, this is our first stage, so we were one of 20 firms invited for stage 1, and we had to get down to stage 2. So I decided, and it was probably a crazy decision, but it worked, so we got to the next stage, decided that for this first stage I would draw everything in pencil. And these are massive drawings. These are this big, right? All the water in that rendering is drawn by a blue pencil. All of the tone in that city figure ground is a pencil. Coloured pencil on where we were proposing the building. You can see Martin Place, the Domain, Sydney Opera House. Ideas being expressed, but in a really crude, deliberately crude way, combined with notes to explain the ideas and sketches across a cartoon strip on the top of the drawing. And those sketches became a composite of the idea for this first stage. So they are combined onto a sheet. There's a little bit of computer stuff in that to get all of that to work and be able to be printed and so on. And these sketches, I don't know where they are, they're somewhere, in a box somewhere, are really time consuming. And that I wanted the jury to see that we were prepared to spend time on the project. The little vignettes that we produced was simply to give a feel for how we thought the building might become. And you can see in those blow-ups the imprecision, the precise imprecision of the hand-drawn versus the computer. I really like that. I like the mistake and the error. And then you see in a drawing like that, which is a more detailed plan of what was then going to be an elongated building, which we changed, I'll show you in a minute. Some really key ideas like adding water to the front of the Vernon designed Art Gallery of New South Wales. But also the smudged sketch, the sort of thing that was in the sketchbook coming onto the drawing sheet. And there you see that lovely quality that in pencil that's really hard to emulate in anything other than pencil. First stage and got to this stage, and this was the sort of final stage. And I changed the whole design, which is not unusual for me. And then we decided we couldn't do this on the drawing board. We had to go to the computer. So what we decided was that we'd emulate the line work to suggest the first stage in the second stage drawings, and use the same basic technique to represent the thinking. So lots of diagrams that were also in a bound report. The bullet pointing of key ideas, so this idea of an art tunnel linking Martin Place through the domain and puking people out onto a major public walk. That's the Cahill Expressway running through there. The idea of introducing a ferry stop here for people to get out and come up to the museum. The light court into the Indigenous Art Gallery space that's below there. A little emerging artists gallery there, and so on. And so we felt that this type of drawing could speak volumes to the jury and explain, without us needing to be there, what we were thinking and how we thought the project could and should go. And those drawings became detailed drawings in the sense that we resolved and reconciled the brief that we were provided with. And these are known as schematic design drawings, but they're well advanced schematics. There you see that same, that's the Botanic Gardens over there, that's the light court into the Indigenous Gallery, that's the little emerging artists gallery. This is a stage on the water. The views this way to Woolloomooloo are beautiful. This was a vertical connector linking people from Woolloomooloo and Garden Island beyond back up into this plaza around the building, and so on. So there's a lot of ideas there. So when a sketch like that's introduced, you can argue that you're giving a feel for what's going on. So there's the water in front of the existing building, people walking up and down and promenading through what was a sculpture court without committing too much to the drawing so that you can't get back out of it again. So it's a suggestive way of selling a scheme. And so on through these sheets. And each sheet explains a different moment in the building. So this is I can't remember what the final construction cost for that ended up being. It was announced recently. It was around half $500 million or more. So these are comprehensive suggestions that you're making in drawing form to the government, to the gallery, to the patrons, to say to them they should pick you above anyone else to do this project. So you need to show that you're capable and also technically competent. I think this, I think this is a really beautifully resolved building and very simple and elegant, and probably quite timeless. You see, we made, I noticed JAHM didn't do this in the end, but we were making a connection underneath the ground and above the Cahill Expressway. It's the Indigenous Art Gallery, the Asian Art temporary exhibition, immersion, audio-visual immersion galleries, a little architects gallery here, and so on. And then elevations running across the top and more sketches running across the bottom and diagrams explaining. Those diagrams are called ideograms, explaining the building in diagrammatic form. That's the oil tank component that you would have seen photographs of, most of you. The building resolved in section. And then the dilemma of how do we represent that without, again, falling into the photorealist problem. Drawings that I can't stand, that are picked out of countries around the world cheaply for architects everywhere. And of course then there was the model, and I thought I'd show that just out of interest. So at the end of all of that, we were told, sadly, that we didn't win the competition. So in those days we were in a floor of Denton Corker Marshall's office in Exhibition Street, and in a fit of pique I grabbed all of the drawings and put them in a big bin and put a sign in the lift lobby, and that photograph ended up on the cover of Casabella in Italy. But the story is that I was getting ready to leave one night and I could hear rustling out in the lift lobby, and I looked around the corner and there was Barry Marshall fossicking through the drawings. It's true, but it's funny. A postscript to the talk, so I've talked enough, is what I realised and what I appreciated about being asked to talk about drawings is something I've never been asked to do. And I realise that I draw all the time. And I'm always drawing, and when I'm not working and trying to relax, I do drawings to relax, but they're not related to buildings. So that chair of ours, that poor old chair, has been drawn and painted a number of times now and studied over and over. And what I realise I'm doing there, it's sort of like a download. I do these over the Christmas break. A download. It's the equivalent of hitting a bucket of golf balls at the driving range. It's keeping your swing in tune. It's keeping your eye trained and your technique okay. Because at a pinch, an architect's got to pull a pen out of his pocket or her pocket and draw something meaningful, usually on a building site. And so those sort of drawing studies, as a postscript to tonight's talk, are really, for me, just a way of making sure that things are in perspective, in proportion, that I can still draw something, that I still have a value of some description. And, as recently as summer just gone, drawing and drawing with the freedom of not knowing, or the freedom, I should say, of knowing that the drawings have no consequence. Because to finish the talk, the thing about architectural drawings is typically they have a consequence, and that's built, and what's built stays there. So thanks everyone. I hope that it was interesting, and I hope I provoked some questions. So I think we're going to do questions now. Thanks.